I speak to you today with feelings of profound sorrow.
King Charles expected the slim red folder on his desk to contain routine constitutional language. Instead, one sentence changed the emotional balance of his family. Anne had been placed above Camilla in the newly approved Regency Order, granting the Princess Royal greater authority during any temporary transfer of sovereign duties. Charles read the line twice, lowered himself into his chair, and suddenly understood that the decision had already moved beyond him. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles had been alone when the constitutional secretary entered his private study and placed the sealed folder before him. The king barely looked up. Papers marked for sovereign review usually carried recommendations requiring his attention, and he reached for his pen with the habit of a man expecting another controlled decision. Yet the Regency Order, the formal plan defining who may exercise royal authority when the sovereign is ill, incapacitated, or temporarily unable to act, contained no ordinary recommendation. It placed Princess Anne ahead of Queen Camilla in operational command and confidential decision-making during any transfer of duties. Charles stopped. He removed his glasses and set them beside the page, but his hand remained pressed against the document as though the words might change beneath his fingers. They did not. The monarch had spent years defending Camilla's place, enduring hostility, scandal, and doubt until the woman beside him was finally accepted as queen. Now a line seemed to question everything he believed had been secured. To him, this was not merely an order of procedure. It felt like a verdict on the marriage he had fought to protect. Anne had not demanded applause, issued a statement, or celebrated the decision. The Princess Royal's name simply stood above Camilla's, quiet, final, and immovable. That silence made the blow sharper. Charles searched the final pages for a space where approval might still be withheld, but the necessary palace and constitutional channels had already cleared the arrangement. He was not being asked to choose. He was being informed. Minutes passed before a courtier entered and found the king still staring at the same page. Charles did not raise his voice. He asked only, "When was my sister informed?" The answer came carefully, "Before the queen." His expression hardened. Charles now understood the deeper danger. Camilla would discover not only that Anne outranked her, but that senior figures had accepted it without defending her position. Yet the true damage would not begin with constitutional language. It would begin when the three people named by that order were forced to confront what it said about each of them. This was not simply a struggle over rank. It reached into the oldest loyalties of the royal family. Charles saw a wife whose sacrifices he believed deserved protection. Camilla saw a crown that could suddenly become ceremonial when power mattered most. Anne saw duty stripped of sentiment. And between them stood decades of affection, resentment, endurance, and unspoken competition that no constitutional document could neatly contain. Charles felt trapped between two forms of loyalty. Camilla had been his chosen companion through years of scandal, rejection, and public pressure. She understood the private man behind the crown and had stood beside him when many believed she never would. Anne represented something different. The Princess Royal, the title held by the monarch's senior daughter, had become the sibling he trusted when duty demanded speed, discipline, and painful honesty. The king loved one woman as his wife and relied on the other as his strongest defender of the institution. Now the new order had forced those loyalties into direct conflict. Camilla entered the sitting room quietly and noticed the red folder turned face down on the table. She looked at Charles, then at the document, and immediately sensed that something had shifted. "What has happened?" she asked. The monarch tried to soften the blow. He called it a technical arrangement, a careful plan designed only for moments of illness or temporary incapacity. Yet the queen heard the hesitation beneath his words. She stepped closer and asked the only question that mattered. "Is Anne above me?" Charles did not answer quickly enough. That silence became the answer. Camilla looked away and clasped her hands to stop them trembling. She carried the title of queen, but the Regency Order, the formal chain of authority used when the sovereign cannot perform royal duties, made clear that ceremonial status did not guarantee final influence during a crisis. Her place beside Charles remained visible, honored, and powerful. But when the crown entered danger, Anne would stand ahead of her. Anne received the news differently. She was sorting correspondence when a palace official called and confirmed the final ranking. She listened without interruption, thanked him, and returned to the papers before her. Yet the princess paused before placing the telephone down. She understood what the decision would cost her brother, and she knew her competence had now become a weapon inside her own family. William's name stood above both women. As the heir, his future role gave him decisive authority, but his support for Anne's placement remained hidden from Charles and Camilla. That secret would deepen the wound when it emerged. None of them could escape what the order symbolized. Charles felt his marriage had been diminished. Camilla felt personally judged. Anne knew duty had placed her against the people she was trying to protect, and this ranking had not grown from theory alone. To understand why Anne's name rose above the Queen's, the story must return to the night when a single disputed decision changed the palace's calculations forever. Months before the new order appeared, the palace faced a private emergency that never reached the public. Charles became suddenly unwell during a small gathering at Windsor, and for several crucial minutes, no one agreed on what should happen next. Camilla wanted calm, secrecy, and time. Anne wanted immediate action. What unfolded behind a closed drawing room door became the incident senior officials would later call the point of no return. Charles had been speaking normally when his words began to falter. The king lost his focus, gripped the edge of a table, and was quickly taken into an adjoining room while the gathering dissolved into confusion. Aides whispered about calling the royal physician, informing William, and canceling the following day's engagements. The royal physician was the doctor responsible for the monarch's immediate care, while the postponed duties mattered because any sudden change to the king's schedule could trigger public alarm. Every minute carried two dangers. Charles's health could worsen, or news of his weakness could escape before the palace understood what was happening. Camilla ordered everyone to wait. The Queen feared that urgent telephone calls would create panic, invite leaks, and turn a private episode into another public crisis. She insisted that Charles should be allowed to recover enough to speak for himself. Her instinct came from protection, not ambition. She remembered how quickly concern about the monarch could become speculation, and she believed silence was the only shield still available to him. Anne arrived after an equerry summoned her. The Princess Royal asked how long her brother had been unwell, then looked toward the aide holding the telephone. When she learned that no physician had been contacted, her restraint vanished. She told him to make the call immediately and ordered William to be informed. An equerry was a senior royal attendant trusted to carry urgent instructions, and the fact that one had called Anne showed how quickly authority inside the room had begun to fracture. Camilla stepped between her and the door. She said she was the Queen and would decide what happened inside her husband's rooms. Anne did not raise her voice. "Tonight you are his wife. Someone still has to protect the crown." Charles heard enough from the next room to understand the conflict. Weak but conscious, he caught Anne's command and Camilla's fear. The monarch later remembered both, leaving him grateful to his sister and wounded for his wife. William arrived after Anne's call and immediately supported the emergency measures. The prince agreed that the doctor should take control and that the next day's program should be suspended. That decision created the first practical alliance behind the later ranking. Senior advisors reviewed the incident in a private documented account. Anne refused to write a criticism of Camilla, but she would not soften the facts during the recorded review. Her honesty made the conclusion unavoidable. The Windsor emergency became the foundation for revised Regency planning, proving that personal love could delay institutional action. When Charles finally discovered that one painful night had been transformed into permanent policy, he could no longer avoid the confrontation waiting behind Anne's closed door. Charles did not summon a committee. He did not send an aide. He walked into Anne's private sitting room, carrying the Regency Order folded beneath his hand. There were no advisors, no witnesses, and no ceremonial smiles. For the first time since the ranking was approved, brother and sister faced each other without the protection of titles, and Charles wanted to know whether Anne had quietly taken Camilla's place. Anne rose when he entered, but the king signaled for her to remain seated. He placed the folded document on the table between them and asked whether she had known her name would appear above Camilla's. The Regency Order was the formal chain of authority used when the sovereign could no longer carry out royal duties, and its wording had now become a personal wound. The Princess Royal answered without hesitation. She had known the recommendation existed, but she had not designed it, demanded it, or lobbied for it. Charles felt his anger sharpen against her calmness. He accused his sister of allowing Camilla to be humiliated without warning. The Queen had endured years of hostility, suspicion, and public rejection before standing beside him openly. Now, after the family had accepted her strength and benefited from her loyalty, the monarch believed that same family had quietly reduced her authority. Anne gripped the arm of her chair. She respected Camilla's devotion, she said, but devotion and constitutional command were not the same thing. Her voice stayed controlled, though the pain beneath it was clear. She reminded Charles of Windsor, of the minutes lost while the Queen tried to protect him from panic and public exposure. Camilla's instinct had been to shield the man. Anne's had been to protect both the man and the monarchy. That difference, she insisted, could not be ignored. Charles leaned forward and asked whether William had supported the ranking. Anne paused. She did not need to answer. The silence exposed what the king had feared. The future king had accepted the recommendation because he believed the princess would act without emotional delay when the crown entered danger. Charles lifted the document, folded it once more than necessary, and pressed the crease sharply. Anne watched him damage the page but made no move to stop him. The sound felt final. Anne's restraint finally broke. She told her brother she had never wanted authority over his wife and would surrender it without regret if doing so did not place the institution at risk. Charles heard loyalty in those words, but loyalty no longer felt like comfort. It felt like judgment. The king stood and moved toward the door. "Then I know where everyone stands," he said. Anne remained beside the untouched tea tray, realizing that doing what she believed was right might have fractured the bond she valued most. But she was not the true architect of the new hierarchy, and Charles's next discovery would reveal forces far more powerful than sibling rivalry. Behind Anne's elevation stood a network of authority Charles had underestimated. William, senior constitutional advisors, and the palace's emergency planning group had reached the same conclusion separately. In a crisis, affection could not be allowed to delay command. Yet the most painful truth was not that these figures preferred Anne's judgment. It was that they believed Charles's devotion to Camilla might prevent him from accepting the decision if consulted too early. William understood what the review required. The emergency planning group, a small palace body responsible for deciding how royal authority would continue if the sovereign became unable to act, had examined every minute of the Windsor incident. Its members asked who should make decisions if Charles were temporarily incapacitated and the prince had not yet assumed full sovereign power. The future king argued that responsibility had to follow readiness, access, and decisiveness rather than marriage. Once he supported Anne, reversing her position became almost impossible. William sat alone with the draft order before signing his recommendation. He reached Camilla's name, stopped, and rubbed his forehead. The prince knew exactly how the decision would feel. She would not see institutional protection. She would see personal rejection. Yet he also remembered the delay at Windsor and the uncertainty that had spread while Charles remained unwell. For William, the danger of repeating that confusion outweighed the pain the document would cause. Anne's record strengthened the case. The Princess Royal had accepted difficult duties without demanding praise, understood palace operations, and confronted senior relatives when others remained silent. Advisors trusted her because she acted quickly and rarely allowed emotion to blur responsibility. Camilla's weakness was described more carefully. No one questioned her intelligence or devotion. The concern was that her first loyalty during Charles's illness would always be to him as a husband, while a regency, the temporary transfer of royal powers when a monarch cannot serve, might require choices he would personally resist. Secrecy protected the plan, but deepened the betrayal. Charles received broad summaries of the review, yet the exact chain of authority remained hidden until the wording had been finalized. Senior figures feared the king would turn a continuity decision into a defense of his marriage, making agreement impossible. A senior secretary closed the conference room door during the decisive meeting and spoke plainly to William. Placing Camilla above Anne, he warned, would satisfy emotion but weaken command. The future king looked down at the draft before answering, "Then we cannot write it that way." Anne later learned that William had defended her role while insisting her elevation remain understated. He feared any public announcement would look like victory over Camilla rather than protection of the crown. But silence could no longer contain the damage. Camilla now wanted to confront William herself. The Queen would not allow Charles to speak for her again, and she intended to ask whether the man who would one day inherit the throne truly considered her unfit to lead. The order had been written in silence, but its consequences were about to become painfully audible when she finally faced the man who had supported Anne over her. Camilla did not arrive angry. That made the meeting more difficult. She entered William's room with no private secretary, no folder, and no rehearsed accusation. She simply asked him whether he believed Anne was more trustworthy than she was. The future king chose his words carefully, but there was no answer gentle enough to disguise the truth. When the monarchy entered danger, he wanted the Princess Royal holding the line. Camilla removed a ring from her finger and placed it on the table before speaking again. William had rarely seen that nervous gesture from her, and its quietness unsettled him. The Queen asked whether Anne's place in the order meant the palace saw her only as Charles's companion, rather than a functioning monarch. A regency was the temporary transfer of royal duties when the sovereign could not act, and the ranking suggested that her title did not guarantee command when power mattered most. Her sadness cut more deeply than anger. Years of service, endurance, and loyalty now seemed reduced to one moment of hesitation at Windsor. William told her the decision was not a judgment on everything she had done. The prince acknowledged the way she steadied Charles privately, protected him during public pressure, and remained beside him when others withdrew. But a regency could demand action against the sovereign's wishes. It required someone able to separate love from command, even when that separation caused pain. Camilla leaned forward. She asked whether compassion had now become a weakness. Anne's decisiveness might protect the institution, she argued, but it could also damage the people trapped inside it. The Queen warned that a monarchy preserved without humanity might survive publicly while breaking privately. William did not dismiss her. He admitted that when he arrived at Windsor, he saw fear in Camilla's face and understood why she wanted time. Yet he also remembered that the physician had not been called and that uncertainty had spread through the room. The future king could not erase that memory from the constitutional calculation. Camilla looked directly at him. "Would you trust her over me with your father's life?" William held her gaze. "I would trust her to know when his life and the crown could no longer be separated." The answer ended the argument. Camilla stood, returned the ring to her finger, and said she understood the distinction, even if she could not forgive how it had been delivered. Then she left, without asking him to reconsider. William remained at the table after the door closed. He summoned no aid. He knew defending the order had widened the distance between himself and his father's wife. Charles later learned that the meeting had happened without him and felt newly powerless. Camilla had begun defending her own dignity, while William had made clear that the hierarchy would not change to spare anyone's feelings. Anne now understood that constitutional arguments could do no more. She would have to meet Camilla alone, without advisors, titles, or anyone else to absorb the hurt. Anne invited Camilla to meet after dusk, when the day's official movement had faded, and neither woman would be watched entering the room. No secretaries were present. No notes were taken. The Princess Royal poured the tea herself, but Camilla left her cup untouched. For several seconds, the two women sat in silence, one holding the authority the other had expected, both knowing that rank had turned private pain into a constitutional fact. Camilla spoke first. She said she did not resent Anne's competence, discipline, or willingness to act under pressure. What wounded her was the belief that loving Charles had somehow made her less capable of serving the crown. The Regency Order, the formal plan deciding who may exercise authority when the monarch cannot act, had reduced that fear to writing. She had stood beside the king through years of hostility, yet one frightened decision at Windsor now seemed to outweigh everything that came before it. Anne did not defend the way the process had unfolded. She admitted that the decision had been handled with unnecessary coldness, and that Camilla should have been informed directly before the final wording was approved. The princess accepted responsibility for not insisting on that courtesy, but she would not apologize for accepting the duty itself. At Windsor, she had watched hesitation spread from one person to another while Charles remained unwell. Someone had to end it, and she had acted because no one else would. Camilla finally explained what Anne had never known. Charles had once asked her, in a private recorded conversation between them, never to allow every moment of weakness to become a palace emergency. He feared that each sudden call, cancelled engagement, or medical alarm would strip away the last pieces of his privacy. The Queen believed she was honoring that promise. She had tried to protect his dignity, not delay his care. Anne's expression changed. For the first time, she understood that Camilla's choice had not come from vanity or denial. It had come from loyalty to the king's own wishes, even though that loyalty had created unacceptable danger under emergency procedures. The princess pushed the untouched cup closer and spoke with care. Outranking Camilla, she said, did not mean replacing her. Camilla lifted the cup. That small movement changed the meeting. The two women agreed that Anne would retain her position in the order, while the queen would receive immediate access, full medical information, and a defined voice over Charles's personal welfare. One would protect the institution. The other would protect the man inside it. Anne promised to tell her brother that Camilla had not been excluded because she lacked value. The queen answered that Charles must also hear that his sister had stolen nothing from her. The monarchy had assigned a burden neither woman had requested. Their private agreement could steady the family, but outside palace walls, the leaked hierarchy was already becoming a national spectacle no quiet reconciliation could contain. By morning, the secret was no longer confined to royal rooms. Britain awoke to a hierarchy few had imagined. Anne above Camilla, whenever the monarchy entered a regency crisis. The story moved from palace corridors to television studios, breakfast tables, and crowds outside royal gates. Some saw a triumph of duty over title. Others saw a queen publicly diminished. Yet one image came to define the entire national reaction. A major newspaper carried the photograph across its front page. Anne walked several steps ahead of Camilla beneath the words, "The woman the crown trusts first." The headline turned a private constitutional decision into a public contest. A regency crisis meant a period when the sovereign could not perform royal duties, and authority had to pass temporarily to others. That dry definition now carried a painful human message. When danger came, the crown trusted the Princess Royal to command before the Queen. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace as broadcasters delivered live reports from the gates. Some visitors held photographs of Anne and praised her discipline. Others argued that Camilla had been humiliated after years of standing beside Charles. One national presenter called it, "The moment ceremonial rank collided with emergency power," and the phrase spread quickly because it captured the conflict in a single line. The Queen possessed title and closeness. The princess possessed command. Charles saw the newspaper beside his breakfast tray. The king folded it inward to hide the headline, then asked that every television in his private rooms be switched off. He could silence the coverage around him, but he could not erase the knowledge that the country was now debating his wife's worth. Camilla reacted differently. She read the article from beginning to end, including the criticism of her hesitation at Windsor, and placed it down without comment. The Queen's composure revealed how much her private meeting with Anne had changed her. She no longer saw the ranking as theft. She saw it as a division of burdens, even if the public preferred the language of victory and defeat. Anne rejected that language entirely. When an aide told her the country was calling her the monarchy's true iron reserve, the princess replied that there was nothing victorious about preparing to act when her brother could not. She understood that praise built on Charles's weakness carried its own cruelty. William issued a formal palace explanation stressing continuity, defined responsibilities, and respect for every senior royal. The prince refused to reverse the order or disguise its meaning. Soon, public opinion settled around a sharper distinction. Camilla remained Charles's closest personal support, while Anne became the crown's emergency commander. Anne and Camilla then appeared together at a scheduled engagement, walking side by side and denying photographers another image of one woman leading the other. With the nation watching and the family no longer divided in the same way, the final decision belonged to Charles not over who outranked whom, but over what kind of king he would be after the truth. Charles returned to the same study where the ordeal began. The red folder remained on his desk, its page still marked by the crease he had pressed into it during his anger. This time, he did not read Anne's name as an attack on Camilla. He read it as a promise that if weakness ever overtook him, someone he trusted would act, and someone he loved would remain beside him. Charles asked Camilla and Anne to sit with him, refusing to speak through aides or private messages any longer. The king acknowledged that his first reaction had come from wounded pride and fear. He had believed the Regency Order, the formal plan defining who would exercise royal authority if the sovereign could not act, was judging his marriage. In truth, it had been designed to protect the monarchy during the very moments when emotion could make clear decisions almost impossible. Anne listened without interrupting. The Princess Royal told her brother she had never wanted superiority over Camilla, nor had she viewed the ranking as a personal victory. Her responsibility existed only for moments when duty demanded immediate, detached action. She hoped she would never need to use that power, because exercising it would mean Charles was too unwell to lead. Camilla then explained the understanding she had reached with Anne. The Queen would remain central to the king's care, medical access, and emotional welfare. His sister would hold final operational authority when constitutional continuity, the uninterrupted functioning of the crown, was threatened. One role would protect the man, the other would protect the institution. Charles opened the folder and signed the acknowledgement page. He did not attempt to reverse the ranking. The monarch set the pen down slowly, turning reluctant acceptance into deliberate endorsement. Charles then faced Anne and apologized for questioning her loyalty. He thanked her for acting at Windsor when uncertainty had frozen everyone else. The words affected the princess more deeply than the elevation itself, because they restored the bond between brother and sister. Charles took Camilla's hand and told her that no document could reduce what she meant to him. The Queen answered that being loved by the king and commanding the crown were different responsibilities. She no longer needed them to be identical. William entered only after the decision had been made. Charles told his son that he still resented the secrecy, but accepted the reasoning behind it. The prince promised that future constitutional decisions would be handled with greater honesty. Anne's higher place had not made Camilla less of a queen, nor had it represented victory over Charles. It proved that personal devotion and emergency command could exist side by side without becoming rivals. Camilla's strength lay in protecting the man. Anne's strength lay in protecting the monarchy. By accepting both, Charles preserved his marriage, repaired his relationship with his sister, and strengthened the crown. The red folder was finally closed, not because the pain had been erased, but because Charles had accepted its meaning. Love would remain beside the throne. Duty would stand ready behind it, and neither would ever again be mistaken for the other. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.